Ask not what your painting wants from you, but what it wants to give you, or where must it go?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a strange dance between what it does and what we impose upon it.
Unlike most people, artists have this driving passion for never staying the same in their art. Even if what they make is tremendous or popular, they soon change. I freaking love this about artists. I have it in me too, and even though I'm not entirely sure why, I find such deep connection with those who share this desire. Today I'm in conversation with a hero of mine, Caio Fonseca. Over the years, he's given me so much assurance about my own artistic path, unbeknownst to him. Over a lifetime of art making, he has demonstrated staying at the forefront of his art. He constantly pushes past where he has remarkably been and moves forward to the edge of what he doesn't quite know. This, of course, is the sweet spot in art making. Above all the accolades, the gallery shows, the sales, the followers, it is in these rare but precious moments when you realize you just made something that is you, but not to you. That right there is what it is all about. I just read that line, and I don't imagine most people even get that. But no matter, this conversation is for the makers in this world. It's for us, for you. Join me now for a glimpse into the grounded and poetic thinking of Caio Fonseca, an artist showing us all how beautiful and poignant this art journey can be. Samples of his art and links to his Instagram and website can be found in the show notes by going to art2life.com and clicking on podcasts. Join me now as Caio joins me from his New York City studio. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. So, Caio, thanks so much for taking the time today to talk. We've been trying to set this up for a while.
We've seen each other online, but it's another reminder that the world is thawing and we can have conversations again.
Yeah. So just to kind of catch people up, I mean, as I said, I've been following your work forever and just super honored that I get to spend some time talking to you. So I so want to quickly dive into all the things you're making, but can you, I know you began in New York and everything. Can you just give us a quick, when you started making your art? I mean, your father was a sculptor and all that. Just give us a little background here.
Sure. The shortest version of the life story would be, I did grow up in Greenwich Village, and both my parents were artists, especially my father, in a house filled with lots of artists visiting. So my mother used to joke of her 4 children who all became artists. One dentist wouldn't have killed us. So, I dabbled in, I was also a pianist. I was studying piano a lot, and it wasn't clear what direction I would go. I did go to university for 1 year, but my brother had been sent to study with a great painter, the son of the man my father had studied with, in Barcelona. And I went to visit my own brother in Barcelona. So I was so impressed with the work he was doing then that I just left college right then and there and spent the next 16 years in Europe. I would visit from time to time, but I had a very, very rigorous training with this painter that we revered. And, he was the son of Joaquin Torres Garcia, whom my father had studied with. But, he knew Picasso, and he walked Mondrian to the subway station. And it was just this whole history that we got through him. And it was all figurative painting we were doing. So for many years, I painted after nature, all the while slowly introducing the abstract art that I sort of knew I would veer toward eventually. My brother and I would go to the Prado every month and get a wheelchair, and I would push him for an hour, then we'd switch. So, and then I didn't feel I was ready to come back to New York. I didn't want to stay in Barcelona after he went back to Uruguay, where my father's from. And I decided to go to Uruguay and study for another year and a half there and meet 21 first cousins. then when I was done with that, I went to Paris for just about 2 years and just was in a tiny little room, sort of slowly making still lifes that were slowly becoming more and more abstract. Then I went to Italy for about 3 years. And finally, I came back to New York, maybe 1990 or 91, and I had my first show at Charles Cole's. I had a few shows in Europe, but basically I painted for almost 15 years without showing.
Wow.
And then, not because of any, maybe it was just this idea that the idea of what it was to become an artist was such an Everest for me, maybe because of how much we respected my father and then my teacher, the idea of just showing because you can. I just felt I needed to be very ready. And luckily, at some point, I did feel ready. I would come to New York every couple of years to pound the pavement and look for a gallery and whatnot. And there's so many funny stories of that. But eventually, Charles Cole's gave me my first show, and it was exhilarating, and it was kind of a sort of overnight success after those 15 years. I mean, the Metropolitan Museum bought a few paintings from that first show. I was like, what? So it was a strange thing, but ever since it was just a very gradual, I would leave New York for not 6 months, 5 months a year and go back to this studio that I had gotten in Italy in the town of Pietrasanta, under the town where my father had a place. And I would go for 5 months every year for 30 straight years. I'm going back next month for the first time in 2 years. And I would just work there so that I could return to New York healthy as an artist in work and body. I'm from New York, but to withstand New York, I needed to get away for 5 months a year for an intensive immersion. And that sort of brings us up to the present.
Wow. So you're going to be going back. You haven't gone for a couple of years now because of COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Grass is very overgrown.
How great just to have that focus, just quiet. So you're just art making the whole time, correct?
Well, I think it was a very healthy instinct to not get swallowed up by New York. Not that I was, just the general aspects of New York. I just know that we artists are the only ones responsible for keeping the level up of our work. And we don't want to be guilty of painting a Wilton or a Fonseca. Even if we end up doing that, we always are trying to make sure we're at the forefront of something that we don't quite know, but we discover. So it was great to do that. And I'll see now if it still can be continued, that routine.
Yeah. And when you had that show and when did the more just you completely went abstract at some point? Do you remember that point? It's so interesting. I don't think I've even seen any of your figurative work,
It was not an abrupt change. In fact, in the other room here, just by the entrance to my studio, there's a old still life that I painted, I think in Paris. And there's still a bread and there's some olives, but then, it's more or less half abstract, but there's still olives in it. So it was a very gradual shift. Then I did many still lifes without a model, just from my head. And it was a slow transformation. My teacher, I remember, used to say that your figurative work will give a sense of the real world to your abstract. And the abstract will give a sense of rigor, order to your figurative things. I would love to paint figuratively again, but I would need years just to get back to the level. You need to do something all the time to get. But I don't want to return to that because I look at nature differently now. I truly look at it as I might paint it, whereas the abstract world is so a part of me, and it's another form of nature, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in a way, you've distilled it. It's an essence, which I think is so, so powerful. It's almost more real in a way.
I feel that way because for me, abstraction is not turning the whole library of forms and the way that nature acts. I find myself reproducing that and the interactions between form and scale and all those big words. I feel it's a connection to nature, but passed through a human's sieve. So, yeah, I'm happy that I had that discipline to do all that figurative painting because it is an inner library of, how colors affect each other. But there's something about the illusion of perfectibility when you are painting, and the illusion is enough. And that just balance that you arrive at. Someone once said, how do you know when a painting's done? We've all been asked the same questions. I don't know it's done. I just know that I can't add or subtract anything. And I've ruined enough paintings to know, get out at that moment. And this reductive way of covering over that I think you and I both use at times.
Yes.
It's almost, I used to watch my father sculpting, and when he removed some stone, you couldn't put it back. So you have to adapt to things if they appear to be errors. But I like that process of it's sort of high stakes of needing to find the balance before the paint dries.
Yes. And it's sometimes I will stand in front of a painting and I'm just amazed that this huge, 7-foot thing is just slightly out of balance. And I'll add the tiniest thing. And that's enough. I just notice how the decisions get more and more and more refined further out I go. And then it can just fall off the other side. But I really sense that yours, you have the same kind of balance. Really, I'm looking at some of your work right now, just the balance of it's like a mobile of things. There's a suspension. So balance, I know, is a huge part of how you're thinking.
Yeah, but it's also, I agree with you that sometimes an asymmetrical seeming imbalance can be cured by a little line that goes through that space, and suddenly you didn't need a huge compensatory form there. It's remarkable, that process. And now I'm experimenting with something potentially very un-Caio. They're very reduced. You may not have seen them because no one's seen them. No. Yeah, I feel like I'm following a new thread, and I'm also doing some sculpture, and I'm composing. It's ridiculous. Amount of things. It's not easy. It's not easy or possible to do them well at the same time, but I'm trying to advance the three. Sculpture is more or less temporary. I'm just trying to do this group of sculpture, but mostly it's been painting and composition for the last 10 years. And it's interesting so I played piano my whole life, and I used to carry composition books across the Atlantic just to have them near. I didn't really know how. I didn't even think you could learn composition. You're born Beethoven or you're not. But I met a guy who's a composer. I'll teach you. Really? And so for 6 years, I studied with him, and oh my God, I just learned so much. And then I have a new teacher who's like a young mathematician. He's just brilliant. He's 29 or something. And it's been such a revelation. And so many of the things I've attempted to do in painting are already codified in counterpoint and the way harmonies are put together. And it's as if I was sort of feeling that already.
In the painting, yes, in the painting. They're so musical.
They used to irritate me when people said that, but now I have to agree. They are kind of musical, and there's a bunch of them on what's it called? YouTube. But it's been a wonderful, even as a serious amateur, to pursue that, because they're really the same thing. But it's like French and Spanish are the same thing. They're just different.
Does the composition of music, do you compose the way you do a painting? Is it the same kind of crawl around in the dark and put rough things in the approximate places and then refine and then take away? Is it the same?
It's a great question. In the biggest sense, I just had a dinner with some musicians that are, instrumentalists, and they don't create the music they play, violinists, pianists. They take a finished, say, a sonata, and they have to reduce it to all its elements, understand it, and then they have to recreate it and then perform it with their interpretation. Whereas you and I start from blank canvas, blank manuscript paper, and nothing. So what do you need to start a painting? It's a good question. You don't want to know everything about it. Then you're just a copy of something, and it feels stale already. But you need a germ of an idea. You need, whether maybe it's just the palette or just one form that you want to build out from, and then you just say, okay, I'm going to risk it. And you dive in, and once you make a few mistakes or good things, you're in it, and it's adding and subtracting, until at this point, once you're in it, and you're not wondering. But the process is often, like right now, I'm doing some exercises in composition, which are just finding the most irreducible germ of an idea. And I'm doing this sort of oscillating minor third, which you don't know, is it part of a major chord or part of a minor chord? It's ambiguous. And how long can I extend the ambiguity of that before eventually it has to? And so in painting, yes, in the old way I used to paint, I would put down all these, colors and then find the painting within it. It's as if you had every word in the English language and then you start removing them until you have a novel,
Yeah, right.
The thing is, you just have to somehow get in the studio and get into a painting. Once you're in there, you're in a great world that you are equipped if you have enough experience. I very rarely make total screw-up paintings. Sometimes I'll get a painting that is done, but just isn't good enough in a way for me. But other times, the painting I wanted to do, I get off course. And I've gotten pretty good at just radically going back to first principles and saying, no, it can't be that painting anymore. And then I find another painting. I was painting over a painting I didn't like one day. And there were I just was painting white over a sort of dark canvas. And I wasn't trying to leave anything interesting behind, but the shapes I haphazardly left were interesting. And I did something that I never would have done had I planned to do it. So it's by being there in front of the canvas, you'll find something. It's a miraculous thing to follow the thread where the painting wants to go. It's a cliche, but it's true.
No, absolutely. And what I'm finding more and more for myself is what I've tracked is the feeling that I'm having. And then I do the adjustments. It's not so visual or as visual as it used to be. There's just like, I can do a solution, I can do a move that's visual, but I make sure that it feels a certain way because I know the feeling of what it wants to be. And I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of correct it based on, and I was wondering, do you emotionally stand there and feel what needs to be made more on emotions or more graphic visually? This is kind of powerful from a distance abstractly, or kind of both maybe.
Well, sometimes when you get a sort of uneducated eye looking at your work, which is no crime, saying, oh, what are these forms? What do they mean? And I'll say, that's a good question. But first of all, they're not abstractions of anything. They are not symbols of anything. And then they ask, well, what's left? And what's left is they are what they are. I never, ever, I guess I can say unequivocally, I never think about anything literary. Even cerebral in that sense of, so when you say a mood, like, I don't know if you mean a kind of mood of melancholy or a mood of this, and that might direct how you do.
It's like the feeling that I have when there's fear a little, there's a risk sense, there's sort of an appropriate feeling that I recognize given the situation I'm in this particular painting. And it's just something that I'm noticing, and it makes me bolder, and it makes it so there's more possible choices for what I can do.
You're almost painting with the character of the atmosphere in the room and in you of the painting you're in.
Yes.
That's interesting. Well, maybe I have a rough equivalent in the sense that every painting is a different world. So even if you're the same painter, if you're in an incredibly minimalistic painting with huge spaces, that is a kind of ethereal world, and you have to be in that mode, even if it's a graphic way to express it. Otherwise, if you're doing something very colorful, or if you're doing something, there's so many things that define the mood of a painting, even graphically. But I don't like to say graphic because it sounds too like it's just a design. It's also the fact that we execute them ourselves, and there's paint all over you, and there's dripping and drying and keeping it wet, and you're an orchestral conductor responsible for everything. And you can't add anything unless that new thing pertains to the whole. And once you start getting off track of that, there's almost no hope. So you always have to keep adding, even when you do things instinctually, you're somehow responsible for all the forms. When you have one form, you're responsible for the next one, and then the next one with those two, and then on and on. And also always conscious, I'm very conscious of the available space within the perimeter. So the sense of scale is so vital. We know that large painting might not attain a monumental scale, and a small painting could.
Yes, I work with a lot of artists, a lot online, teaching and giving them, principles and art making information and just a process. But I teach like on a 12-inch format because it's so quick. And sometimes I get people who are a little further along who are frustrated because of the scale. But so this is a perfect example that I'm looking at this. Yeah. So a small painting like what you're holding up for me, that looks 12 feet tall. And that's the art. You can make a small painting look monumental. And until you can, you should stay small, There
are billions of little splatters that of paint. And to do a large painting or to do a small one, I would say it's roughly the identical amount of decisions. It's actually quite hard to execute small like that.
Yes.
But yeah, we're lucky, the mysteries of all of this. And sometimes you've got a lot of artistic courage and sometimes you don't. Sometimes I find it hard to even get in the studio. Something's keeping me out. But once I get there, it's like, that's where I want to be.
How do you do that? I mean, what do you do when you're stuck and you don't feel like you can? I mean, it's hard to imagine you feeling that way, but of course you do. But what do you do? Do you just go in and just start doing something? I mean, that's kind of what I do.
In Italy, which was the laboratory of someone once said, "What's your biggest influence?" And I was joking, but now actually it's not a joke. What's your biggest influence? The lack of interruption is my biggest influence.
I love that.
When you can waste the whole morning knowing you have the summer day from 12 till 8, anything's possible. And in the city and in the US, it's just a little harder. You just have to, the main key is you just have to get in there and go in to clean your brushes. It doesn't matter why you go into the studio. Go in and having canvas prepared. You can't finally be up for it and then you're not ready. So and I do a lot of work on my canvases before I begin painting. So having the possibility of working is key, because there's nothing worse than finally being ready and then you're out of a color or you're don't have the appropriate canvas. In Italy or generally, I think when you can't paint, you should paint. And I have a wall. I love doing, they're not paintings, but doodles or sketches on my wall. It's a bumpy wall. There is zero pressure of the universe by painting on my wall. And things turn out so well on my wall. And so I'm trying to take that weight of the universe away from approaching canvases. Enough experience, I should know, I just need to get into it, put a layer of something on it, and suddenly you're in there.
Yeah. And these are oil paintings, right? You're mostly doing oil on linen or oil on...
No, I used to paint only in oil when I did figurative painting. But the way that I paint now, that horrible word acrylic, is ideal for these layers that I do now. And I don't know, I found a way to really make them very rich and layered. And of course, then I wax them with powdered pigments. And
wow, really?
Yeah, because oil right now with the drying times wouldn't work because I'm doing so many coverings. And so most painters that have come here would not guess that these are acrylic because, I don't know, for example, I'll often paint with a pure white to keep the luminosity and then tone it down from there. Or I take these old brushes and I'll destroy the painting seemingly with covering it with this dark wax with different powdered color. And then I'll remove 98% of that and it leaves the surface really luminous. And, each color, as you know, requires its own
right.
They're not the same.
Acrylic paint can be made I mean, it needs to have thin paint on top of itself to get that luminosity. But yeah, absolutely.
It's like the difference between film and video. Video can seem very, in the old days at least, kind of blurry and kind of not that sumptuous. But I'm very intimate with these colors now, and I'm constantly sort of aware of what each color needs to get that extra richness. It's really an intimate relationship with all those main colors. And even if you just have the basic colors, how they interact, how they mix, it's esoteric if you had to write it all out. But, with enough instinct and experience, it's simple and complex.
No, absolutely. And I just love the fact that I do large oil paintings, but I'm now I teach with acrylic, and I make a ton of small paintings with acrylic, and I'm fast because I layer things. But the way I get around it is I do multiple paintings, and we'll work on one for an hour, then get another one and another one, another one. But there's just some amazing wax and kind of encaustic drawing pastels that work with oil that I don't want to give those up, and I would have to if I went entirely acrylic. But having said that, I've just set up my studio. I have like a whole acrylic setup now with enough paint to work larger, and it's fun, and it doesn't stink and all the rest. But
I've seen you cover a dark green with a white with a kind of palette knife, not a palette knife, but a thing. But that's already, it has to be dry under there.
So that's pretty dry. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then I'll put on thick layers of oil paint and then let those dry. And I'm mixing cold wax in with it. So it gets that kind of like your paintings have that rich body to it. There's a thickness, and you're scoring into it, and your
physical life of the painting.
But I mean, you're able to, one of the things with acrylic I've found is it's much harder. But it seems like you're able to scratch into it. Is that something, do you just, are you adding something that makes the acrylic softer, or it just looks that way?
I just am constantly spraying it with water.
Oh.
And I also, my preference is to keep working on a painting until it's done, no matter how late because I want it to stay wet to keep certain possibilities available. Obviously, I don't always finish it in one day. So, there are places where I can stop and then add more. But I just made an order from the factory of these very high load pigments. So a titanium white that's very dense with pigment. So it's quite opaque. And the same with a kind of bone black. I also use gouache when I do on paper, that thick,
gouache is so beautiful. But you're spraying the acrylic, so you're retarding its drying time, so it has that clay quality, right? Is that what you're doing?
But no, there are products that do retard it, but I never liked all that stuff. It just feels a little bit too gelatinous.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, just the dampness. If it's damp, and then you put acrylic on top of damp paint, then it slows it down even more, and you can kind of carve into it and
you don't have to
smooth
keep
it out.
Wet, but as long as it just get a chance to dry, it certainly can then take. I have a whole arsenal of implements that I've gotten from cooks and dentists and composers' nibs, and I'm always looking for different tools, pizza cutters, and all these things to make different marks on the surface. And it's a wonderful feeling, as we talked about before, just connecting two forms by just scoring the surface. So, like, even after you finish a painting, there's like the sort of post-production of which really makes the painting is the final surface that it's going to have. And you can also ruin a painting that way, but I'm very careful. But either I use wax, I used to use different glazes, and then with my hands take it off. I probably should have been wearing gloves for the last 30 years. Let's hope it's not. So
yeah, I use I use cold wax on my paintings, and then kind of wipe that down and kind of polish it. It has a nice
Did you put some color in the wax at the end?
No. But I'll use liquid on the paintings to kind of seal them so they're really rich and sort of too shiny. And then I adjust that sheen with the wax and kind of polish
the luster first and then tone it down.
Yes. Yeah. Totally.
That's a good thing too. It's like putting a rock underwater, but then letting it dry a bit.
No, absolutely. Right. That's totally how I explain it, by the way. I'm like, you know how people, in hotels, they spray the road as you pull in. It's always wet because it looks so good,
Right.
It has that richness. So I was curious, you have the forms in your work and then you have the spaces. Can you talk about space and what you're doing with the intersection with these lines and like you're connecting forms, and what is the space? Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, so imagine I'll put a big canvas in front of me and I don't know anything about what the painting will be yet. Suppose I don't know anything. That's fine. I can go in there. I put down all these proportions. I'm not a geometric or mathematical minded person, but the golden section.
Yes.
So I have several large or small compasses, and I will subdivide with charcoal on a white canvas, make some marks. And I now know the sort of force field of all these proportions. Doesn't mean the painting has to use them explicitly, but I play off of them. And if it were getting old or leading to rote solutions, I would have abandoned it, but it never loses its power of suggestion. And so I can look at, it's not a painting, it's not an idea, it's just proportions. And I can be sitting in my chair just wanting to have that first idea so I can get up and start. So I'm not trying to express my Caio Fonseca's mood, my history, my this. I want to express that space that is available to me. And so if I do choose, I would love to just leave the painting with those proportions. It's so beautiful. I always end up making a painting, but possible I would have a very minimalist phase before it's all over. And so if I put down a form, it's not because the form in and of itself is such an important subject, but it's what does it do to that space? And certainly by the time I add something else, what is created in the space between them and what do they then imply I have to do over here? And if those are my principal forms, then maybe these little tiny forms can help connect it. And then this line. So the real painting is this sort of petri dish of the space, and the forms only serve to be the sort of visual manifestation of those underlying things, if that makes sense.
Totally, it totally does, and that's like you're creating. It's this world, and there's depth, and it's like there's not one. You've that's what's beautiful about your work. It's not referencing one thing. It's just this alchemy of this group in this moment, in this time. And there's a time aspect to this as well. And then the depth, and we can go in and we can go out. And then because they don't mean anything, I feel I can go in it and be in that space.
You're a painter, so you know that you can give yourself permission. I had a wonderful collector or human in my studio, and she wasn't that versed at looking at abstract paintings. She said, well, I like that, but wait, what does it mean? And I said, it's perfectly normal question. And I just said, well, when I just played you that Bach piece, you said, oh, I love that, but you didn't say, but what does it mean? You seem to accept that piece, thoroughly abstract, you were able to absorb it without asking that question. So now let's talk about this painting. You say you like it, but then you ask, what does it mean? Totally fine to ask that. So I said, I could answer you, but why don't you explain to me what it means? She got a little nervous. I said, don't worry. For example, I see a red form here. What do you see? And she said, well, there's another red form here. And then, of course, they're connected by those two little forms, but then they have to be connected. She started giving a half-an-hour lecture on the whole painting. She was just all over it, experiencing it, simply because she gave herself permission to look at it the way she listened to that music. And so once you strip yourself, at least with my work and other painters, have all kinds of literary elements, and that's fine. But it really is about itself. And like that little one I showed you here, I mean, you cannot have these black forms without the white forms, and vice versa. And the white forms make the black forms, and on and on and on. It's like going like this with your eyes. There's no place for commentary. You're just seeing form being created and living in this space. So it's wonderful. Some people innately know how, I mean, a painter would, but how to go into that world. But it's beautiful when people sort of get the gist, that they can look at it. And it's not haphazard. This is what I paint. It's not that it's so studied and planned, but there is an absolute intelligence of why these things are interconnected and why they all belong together in this painting, and nothing from this painting could survive in that painting.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's like site specific, you know. It
really is. No matter how much of a thread there is between paintings, you know, that's why it's very difficult for me to go back and change something in a painting.
Because you're different now.
Yeah, and you don't have the mixture, and it would just be, it's hard to go back for me. In composition, it's wonderful. Either it's on a pencil and a page, or a computer, a program, you know, and you can just abandon work for days and come back. It doesn't dry. It doesn't.
I like to think of what helps me, and what I think is this idea of like, well, what does this painting feel like to you when you stand in front of it? Well, what's the feeling? Because that is the subject matter, actually, of what you're doing.
I don't usually ask myself that question, but I think that is a very important question. And I think it's not a bad thing that I should ask myself, whether I say it in those words or just like, instead of what do I intend to do, ask not what your painting wants from you, but what it wants to give you, or where must it go?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a strange dance between what it does and what we impose upon it. But it's like, you know it when you see it. I've also gotten good, I think, at, if I'm in the flow, like if something occurs to me, do it. Like it didn't occur for no reason. It could be a mistake, but if something occurs when I'm in the swim of it, do it. And then, not quite, but then you think. And that's an interesting way to keep the flow going.
Yes, just to stay in motion like that.
Yeah, I find it's a perpetual motion, and stepping back too much from it can be a little dangerous sometimes. But you definitely have to step back physically to see it, because you could be finishing the whole thing and then, oh no. I mean, it is mildly aerobic to get it done, because it's a physical thing. And I have a little chair in my studio that I've had in every studio for the last 25 years, like a little kindergartner's chair. It's so covered in paint that when it's on my paint covered floor, I can't find the chair.
Dude, I am the same thing. I trip over this stool. It's covered in paint. And I almost killed myself last week because I just stepped backwards on it. You know, and you're right. I love the going and coming. I love the going up, the intimacy, and I love the going far away and like from a distance and up and close. And that's a powerful, you know, it's like you're just exploring all aspects, all the full range of it. You know, do you think of your paintings as a whole? Like I picture my work like when I'm making a mark, once something's going, where it is in space, do you think of it, or are you flat?
Wait, you're saying, do I think of it as if it were sort of in a three-dimensional spatial thing?
Yes. Because your work has that. Your work has you can, I mean, your work really has this where you could fly around like a bird behind the forms, both. Under the forms, over the forms.
Yeah, both. I don't try explicitly to imitate a three-dimensional world. I stay very conscious of the two-dimensional quality of it. However, I mean, I don't do kind of trompe l'oeil trying to be.
No.
But that said, I absolutely want this. It's flat in the way an apparition would be, something that just is floating in front of you. And then, of course, I do want to accentuate the almost atmospheric quality of it. But we are two-dimensional artists, but it is wonderful to intimate that. And also, there's obviously things in my work where a plane is in front of another.
Yes, of course. It's something's in front of something, crossing crossing in front of something, and then those lines, you use those lines that flatten the space.
I just found a work on paper. It's right over there. Here, I'll show it to you. 1 second.
Oh, good. Okay.
This is a painting only with lines scratched.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to see if you could do a whole thing just with, and it's rubbed with red wax. And
yeah, those lines tend to flatten the space out also. It's like, oh, there's these dark shapes and they're coming forward. And then there's these lighter shapes that are further back. But then how is it possible that this line is going across the surface of the painting? There's a juxtaposition.
Yeah, there is an ambiguity there. But I try to stay in the flat world. But then in the end, I couldn't agree more that my desire for the moving atmospherics does give a sense of, sometimes you do an underpainting, you do that too. And it won't even be a painting yet, but say it's an almost watercolory thing. It's like, and it's so much like nature. It's like it could be a hyper realist sunrise thing. I did one painting where the underpainting was so much like waves breaking on a beach that I said, oh my God, I could make this into a landscape. But then I covered over it and you can just see it's so reduced what is visible that you can just see that the things that may animate that painting are its proximity to natural things. So this is making me feel like working, so that's good.
Yeah, right. So what's coming up for you as we kind of wrap this up thing? I'm just curious, like what are you excited about? What's coming up for you? You mentioned some more simpler work.
Yeah. Well, I've done a fairly large group, but I still think of it as experimental. They're all Black and hard to explain, but maybe they're connected to the sculpture because for the first time, it's just one form of Black and it's resting on the bottom of the canvas in an almost architectural sense.
Wow.
And then this little channels. I went down the Grand Canyon in a kayak and nobody told me that there were going to be 10-foot waves and had several near drowning experiences, but it was an amazing thing to do. And someone said, well, how will this influence your work? And I scoffed. I don't get influenced that way. But I'm telling you, something about the constant flows, 3 weeks on the river. So I'm experimenting with something new. So I'm very excited, as anyone would be, to be doing something new that still feels like me. To do something new just for new is not.
No, right. That makes sense. It fits in.
Not do a Wilton, but you have to do something new, even if it's my work is evolutionary. I do a little change here. So if you come every few years, wow, that's really new. Whereas if you come every month, the FedEx guy came last month and he said, sign here. And then he said, oh, hold on, wait. Oh, you collect all the same guy. It was like I collected all the same artists. And I said, yeah, I guess so. But so I'm excited to finish these sculptures. I'm going up to a friend of mine's house who's a sculptor out of New York. And I've got this idea for these small limestone sculptures I'm going to do. I bought this sort of fluorescent red and fluorescent orange powder. And I'm going to try to see if this idea I have of mixing the glue that glues stone together, mix it with those powders. So the beautiful sand-colored limestone with this fluorescent red, a little bit coming out in the crevices. We'll see if that works, but I'm just going to dive into that. I've been doing some wood sculptures from scaffolding planks that they use in construction, and there's one over there. But so things like that, I am trying to get beyond the current phase of my compositions now.
It's so great. So I'm this way a bit. I just sort of take on a few things all the time. I've got a bunch of things going all the time.
Your paintings, your teaching,
Yeah. And I love running, which is sort of connected to it. But writing as well, and doing this, like just talking and creating story, and I just find I can't get enough of it. It's so super interesting.
I think it's good to have several disciplines, knowing which one is your principal one.
Yeah.
I can make mistakes or I can do that, but I know what I'm doing in the studio in terms of, I know when it goes wrong. I know when it's right. and you have to keep pushing that. But in music, I'm still like, hey, I don't really understand this, but I'm just trying to, so that's also a wonderful struggle too, to get up to speed. But I've learned so much in 10 years. So it can be done. The question is, so what am I excited about? You said, well, obviously the pandemic was, I'm a loner, so I'm used to being isolated. That didn't faze me. What I didn't like was everyone else being isolated. I like when people are in their cubicles and working, like I can be, walking the streets late at night. But I did a lot of experimenting. Also, I was with an art dealer for 23 years and he died. And so I'm not with a gallery right now. And I realized that kind of felt really good. And it felt really like a good laboratory of not having to just experiment. And I am having some little shows here and there now, but it almost feels more like when I was 20, like just painting for myself. Sometimes you do a painting and 19 years later, someone walks in and that's the one they want. And you say, wow, it's just been sitting there for 19 years. And
yeah, I know.
The sort of chimeras of career and all that feels very, you can go through the motions. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm very happy that it doesn't feel it. That's for younger people to think there's a place to get to, and that's good. Young people need, but
right.
I still feel I can do some of the same things professionally, but that's not the real story. The real story is an inner game of how do you, first of all, if you feel good about your work,
that's everything. Yes.
Feel good in your body, so I think it's an inner thing. I think the pandemic did help many people reevaluate whatever their priorities are, jobs, and
yes, it brought meaning to, or the need for meaning. I think.
Yeah, when we have, like, I went to a dinner party that could be deadly. Who the hell wants to go? But it was this wonderful musicians, and it was such a give and take, and it gave energy. And this is a good conversation. That's a good thing to have.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just, when I'm not painting, when I'm not working, I had a, patch where I wasn't doing much. And you just get to where you want to be participating in this thing. It gives everything meaning. Everything's adjusted around it. I totally get that. It doesn't really matter so much. I got to update this website, but I don't know if I'll ever do it. I don't even care that much, but I'm very into the work.
My website is so out of date. And I don't even have enough stuff to hire someone. I used to have an assistant every day, not in my studio, but in the office. And I think it's very important to get at a certain age, at least to get over these illusions of what exaltation of yourself is. It's really it's much more satisfying. Like sometimes you just, I finished a piece for piano and cello and took, 6 months and I was out of a piece and not writing one. I really felt exiled. I want to get back in. And because once you're in something, you're in. And same with the painting. And when we're not painting, it can seem very fearsome how to get back in. But I guess that's always going to be there. That's why I like painting on my wall. Or you need a kind of invented courage. And then you realize you need it anyway. It's where you want to be, right? And once they give you that thread, you just follow it. You just follow it until the end. And, it's, and sometimes I see a painting of mine somewhere, I don't know, maybe someone's house or that I did 25 years ago. And I look at it like, wow, yeah, that's not me now. I wouldn't have done that, but it works for that. It works there.
Right. And you were in a different place. You were pulling that thread back there. You didn't know where it was going then, but you were further back there pulling that along. And there's tons in it that relate to what you're doing now. Totally.
It is the same thread, though. I was very conscious of that, of one painting leading to another. And then there's certain categories of, this kind of painting I do and that kind. But within each sort of, different category. Yeah, the wonderful thing is how to be you without being too you,
Yeah, I love that. Yes. It's like, don't, please God, let me do another Nicholas Wilton painting, please.
And sometimes you say,
Yeah.
what am I going to do? What am I, what you want to do. What? So I thought, don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm about to do
Yes.
anything you want, just don't do that. And that's a wonderful solution sometimes.
Absolutely. Wow. So Caio, listen, I just super appreciate you taking all this time today. And it's just really, really inspiring. And thank you so much for this conversation.
You're very welcome. And I think a good conversation between two painters mimics the conversation between one painter and his painting. And it's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at art2life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to art2lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to art2lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.